Good day, good people. My name is Brad King, and this is the Downtown Writers Jam video podcast, which is part of the Solid Listen Podcast Network. Max the Dog and I are coming to you from deep inside the Jam Bunker today, and we are very excited because we're having our favorite topic on the show, which is science. On the program is Dr. Gale Sinatra and Dr. Barbara Hofer, and their book is called Science Denial: Why It Happens and What to Do About It. Now, if you've been listening to the program, you know we've had some scientists on here over the past couple months because I think this is the most important topic that is facing this country right now. It touches on so many different aspects of our life, from climate change to coronavirus. All of this stuff is this distrust that we seem to have now, or some people seem to have, for science. So I'm very excited to have them on the program. So Dr. Sinatra is the Stephen H. Crocker Professor of Education and Psychology at the School of Education at the University of Southern California. And this sort of blew me away. She has 3 degrees in psychology from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She directs the Motivated Change Research Lab and has been honored with the Sylvia Scribner Award for Influential Research from the American Education Research Association. Dr. Hofer is a professor of psychology emerita at Middlebury College, is a fellow of the American Psychology Association. She received her PhD in psychology and education from the University of Michigan and her EDM in human development from Harvard University. She is the recipient of national awards for both research and teaching from the American Educational Research Association and the American Psychological Association. So all of that is to say, these two know what they're talking about. And what's really fascinating about these books for me is looking at the psychology of why people distrust science. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but the underlying causes for why these things happen are, I think, really important for us to discuss. So before we get to that, we have a little bit of business. The Jam comes out every Wednesday, and these video podcasts come out about every Monday and Friday. There's 2 things you can do to help us spread the word about this. First, tell your friends about us. And second, leave us a written review or star review wherever you listen to podcasts, particularly if you listen to Apple Podcasts, because the star rating and the written reviews are how we get found. You can also pop on over to our Facebook page and leave us a review there, or head to thewritersjam.com and leave us a testimonial through the contact page. While you're there, if you're looking for a book to read, we have book reviews, or you can click on the bookshop link there and buy a book from anybody who's been on the program. You can also sign up for a monthly newsletter. If you just want this showing up in your email box on the first of the month, do that. The last thing you can do while you're there is support everybody on the Solid Listen Network. Click on that Patreon button, just a couple bucks a month, get commercial-free episodes, bonus content from everybody on the network. So if you've listened to the show, like I said, the last few months, we've had lots of people that have been looking at science denying and why people distrust science. And the tenor of the conversation has always been less about the politicizing of science, but more about how we have to learn to talk to people that don't believe or that deny science truths that exist. And this conversation is so fascinating to me today, the one you're about to hear, because we have to understand that a lot of times people don't trust science, not because they don't trust science, but because of these underlying psychological issues or fears or concerns that they have about something in their life. So you can't just say, like, why don't you believe X? What you have to do is understand, well, what is it that you're afraid of, or what do you fear? What don't you understand, or what is it that concerns you? And you can, it's sort of, as you begin to get into that, you realize that, well, maybe there's not this disconnect that we think there is, but it's very difficult to have those conversations. And so having people like Dr. Sinatra and Dr. Hofer on, who writing about this and talking about this, I just think is wildly important. And they're charming and lovely and brilliant and hilarious. So you're also going to enjoy the show today. And I'm excited to bring it to you. So thank you for stopping by the bunker to spend a little time with Max and I to talk a little bit about science. I hope that you're doing well and taking care of yourself and taking care of each other. And I hope that you will sit back and spend about 35 minutes with us as we have a conversation with Dr. Sinatra and Dr. Hofer. I have three questions, but we'll start with what's the underlying cause of all this? Because, popularly right now, everybody says, oh, Republicans don't believe in science. But like when I was at MIT's Technology Review, nuclear power was a thing and GMOs were a thing. And I mean, it was a nightmare talking to my lefty friends, trying to explain to them, like, these fears are unfounded by and large, the ones that you have, right? Like, this is not a Republican or Democrat thing.
I'm really grateful you brought that up, because I think that's a lot of why we wrote this book, is that what we wanted to do was talk about how it's not an us and them issue, but that there are underlying psychological explanations for why we're all susceptible. It's pretty clear that some people are more susceptible than others. Let's not make it sound like it's balanced. But overall, there are cognitive explanations, psychological explanations for why all of us can fall prey to denial, doubt, resistance, whatever, to things that are fairly well established facts.
So let's pop into that. Like, what are those underlying factors? Like, what are the things that, we should all be thinking about?
Well, we cover several of them in our book. We look at issues such as the cognitive biases that we have. In other words, the ways we're sort of wired to view the world sometimes conflict with the information that is actually verified by scientists. We look at issues like how we think about knowledge and how we think scientific knowledge comes about, or how we misunderstand that sometimes. We look at things like emotions and motivations, the internet,
and social identity.
the social identity that plays, intersecting with the internet and the spread of misinformation. So there's a number of issues that we discuss in the book.
So it feels to me like, and I realize having you just said that, me beginning with it feels to me is one of those things that we got to be careful with, but it feels to me very much like much of this is tied into social identity, that like these other sort of things have always existed, but this idea of a collective that you can immediately tap into and find an identity in a way that you couldn't sort of pre-web and pre-internet seems to be the biggest issue that we're facing. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe it's just the biggest one.
And it is interrelated, because in many ways it's a cognitive shortcut. It's a way to say, I don't have to do all this investigation myself. Here's what my people think. So I'm just going to go with that. And that's really troubling. And as Gale said, the internet amplifies that. So you've got people living in these little echo chambers where they're only being fed back the things that they already believe. Or even if they go search for information, they're using what's called confirmation bias. They search until they see something that supports what they believe, no matter how erroneous it is. But all of this is a part of thinking we're tribal beings. We affiliate, we use cognitive shortcuts to think about the things that our friends think about.
But you don't want to get kicked out of the group either. And so there's a powerful incentive to conform. So I just read an article yesterday that in Missouri, in the Ozarks, people are going to get vaccinated in disguise. They don't want their friends and neighbors who are anti-vaccination to see them getting vaccinated. There's a powerful incentive to remain in the same viewpoint as your friends and neighbors. You don't want to get kicked out of the group.
Well, and I know I guess part of what I was saying is that, I was at Wired in 99, and there's a book called Geeks. There are all these books about the ability of people to find community that they couldn't find, offline, because if you were a gay kid in a small rural town, like the internet suddenly, so there was this, like, it is this, we are tribal, and the internet has allowed us to find that tribe anywhere, right? And as much goodness as there is to it, there's also this other thing where it's like, holy shit, we're not paying attention to the fact, the joke we made a sort of post Wired is we were so happy because it was democratic. Anybody could say anything they want. And then like 10 years later, we were like, holy shit, Anybody can say
Can say
anything they want.
anything they want.
Well, we thought that it would democratize information so that we'd be exposed to multiple points of view, but it's
Right.
essentially done the opposite. You're now just exposed to points of view that agree with yours, and you're not exactly falling down a rabbit hole. You're pulled down the rabbit hole by these algorithms, and so you see more and more
Yeah.
of the information that you agree with, and less of the information that is different from what you believe. And so we thought it would democratize, as in provide multiple voices. It does, but you don't see those multiple voices as much once you're stuck in one of these rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Or even if you do, again, back to tribal identity, your affiliation says, okay, but I'm going to believe what these people believe. But I read a wonderful story yesterday about a 25-year-old in, I'm going to say, Tennessee, who finally decided to get vaccinated, and she had believed that infertility was going to result. And she thought, I just can't do it. I don't want to be infertile. And then when she started seeing how bad it was around her, she decided to actually go find information. and she had this wonderful quote about, it's really good to be skeptical, but it's really bad to be ignorant. Right?
Well, and I think this is an issue, right? Like that, people believe that. I got some friends that say, you should question everything. And I just remind them, like, kind of, but no, like, there are things that you can question. And obviously you shouldn't just blindly follow anything, but just asking a question isn't in and of itself intelligence. That is, you can be reductive with that and just absolutely find your way to what you want by always saying, well, what about this? What about this? And if you have a child, that to be true.
Yeah.
So here's the other part of this that is fascinating to me is the role of the media, because I was a journalist, right? Like, and when I taught journalism, I used to make my kids read The Invisible Gorilla, right? Like which is a book about all the ways that you will fool yourself into believing a thing. So that you don't go into a situation and think, I have seen this, therefore this thing that I think that I've seen is true. Because you may not be seeing exactly what you think it is. So what's the role of that? Not the Facebook, not the weird groups, not the social spaces where people sort of go, but the media as they write about science, as they write about these things. What's their role?
Well, one of the issues that has really concerned the two of us is the idea of balance, the way in which the media has for a very long time acted as though everything is sort of 50-50. So we've got to have balance. If we're going to talk about climate change, we better go interview a denier. Right? And then it misrepresents the actual known science. It makes it sound as though it's unsettled when it's not. And we love that, 5 or 6 years ago, the BBC came out and said, nah, we're not going to do that anymore. Reporters are not allowed, when they talk about climate change, to go interview a denier, because we know what climate change is now. We can't do that. And there's some nice psychological studies that show that balance can become bias. So when people start to see those kind of articles, they think, oh, well, we don't really know. Therefore, there's some doubt here. And Gale and I've read a lot from Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway about manufacturing doubt, the ways in which the media can also be complicit in helping other people think that more doubt exists than it does. So Gale, what do you want to say about media here?
The both sidesism, everyone is aware of it, and yet they continue to do it. And so we really have to push back on the both sidesism. In addition to that, though, there's the clickbait headlines, and everybody wants, eyeballs on their story. And so the clickbait headlines, as you know, when you click on them, often the story says almost the opposite from what the headline says, or the headline is really misleading. And so it's both sidesism, and then it's clickbait headlines that are really drawing you to the wrong idea. And a lot of people don't necessarily read the whole story, right? Yeah. That's why Twitter started that. Are you sure you want to share this article? Because we know you haven't read it yet.
Yeah. It's interesting because that's where, whenever they do the studies, like journalists by and large tend to skew left, right? Corporate ownership tends to skew right. The actual people on the ground tend to skew left. And I don't think, because I know, because I've written about science and technology and I read things in the paper and I'm like, well, that's not right. Like I know for a fact because they think they understand the science. They think they understand that a breakthrough happened, right? And I've just put breakthrough in quotes if you're listening, because breakthroughs are oftentimes like 50 years worth of science happening or 30 years worth of science.
Yeah.
And the breakthrough is oftentimes very small, but it's big to scientists. So they make it a big deal because it's big for that thing. But a lot of times it's just filling in a hole, which is important. But to the public, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Well, they may not understand the science themselves. I mean, you don't have to take Bayesian statistics to become a journalist. And
Right.
there's all sorts of scientific content that is very complex, like the genetics behind the mRNA vaccine. I mean, if you're a writer for the New York Times, I don't know that you've necessarily taken a genetics course recently. So this is complicated stuff. And we regret that there's fewer science writers and fewer science pages in mainstream media than there used to be in the past, because those writers tended to have science degrees and tended to have more of an understanding of the scientific processes than your typical journalist who really shouldn't necessarily have that, but we would love them to.
And then you have universities that, and this sort of gets to the scientists themselves, you have PR machines that will take oftentimes things that come out of research labs and try to pre-package them into stories that are not actually representative of what's happening, right? Like there is this.
Or they might be representative, but it's such a tiny little study that it isn't really worth reporting yet. I mean, we know we need replication, we need multiple studies. My favorite this week that I sent to Gale was from Harvard Magazine. This headline that eat chocolate and lose weight. And it's the kind of thing Gale and I are always laughing about, but this was about better if you eat that chocolate at breakfast, you're more likely to lose weight. And, before you start spreading chocolate on your toast in the morning, you might want to dig a little deeper here. There were 19 people in the study, and it's so lacking in conclusiveness. But Harvard Magazine, did this big promo with a clickbait headline to get people to think, okay, eat your chocolate.
But this is dangerous because it creates mistrust, because first they say chocolate is good for you, then they say chocolate is bad for you. Those scientists, they don't know what they're talking about. So, some university wants their researcher with a new finding to get their finding out, and that's great. But really what you should trust is not one study, which Brad, but accumulated evidence, the scientific consensus. And journalists don't write enough about how did we get to that consensus? How many times have you heard this vaccine is brand new? It came out of thin air.
This is my favorite.
In 12 months. No, the mRNA technology is decades old, and that has been evolving in labs for quite some time. So it's misleading to give these clickbait headlines.
Well, the Gormans and I talked about, it was one of the points that I wanted to discuss with them and you, is that people don't understand the scientific process, right? Like coronavirus isn't new, but now that we've called this thing warp speed, and now that there's been a vaccine in 18 months, which is fucking astounding, but it's 18 months plus 30 years. Right. Like that's right. It could only get in 18 months because of all of the work that got done. And then literally the whole world marshaled every resource that it could. And we know the vaccine works, but it's still new, right? Like we're still figuring out, like, do you need a booster? How often will you need it? What are the antibodies? There's still a lot of questions to the long-term efficacy, not if it works, people. So get the goddamn vaccine.
and again, if you didn't grow up really learning how science works and what the process is, you can start to think, oh, they're just all over the place. They don't really know what they're doing. They change their minds. Instead of seeing science as an iterative process, and that with a novel coronavirus, this is novel, you've got to be figuring it out on the ground. And we should be grateful for everything they figured out. We now know that it is transmitted in a respiratory way, that we're not having to wash our groceries down when we bring them in the house anymore.
The strength of science is that it does change with new evidence, right? And that's not viewed as a strength. We keep hearing, oh, scientists lied about mask wearing. It's that the situation has changed in regards to understanding, and you want science to be updated based on that, and you'd want public policy to be updated based on that science. And so people aren't used to this progression going so quickly.
Yeah. Well, and human nature, I think, is to, I mean, this sort of gets back to what you were talking about, is that we want to be right, and confirmation bias exists because nobody likes to be wrong. And science is literally about being wrong. Like, I mean, that is nobody, no, you're not setting out to prove something right. You're trying to prove it wrong. And if you can't prove it wrong enough, then it's like, well, I guess this is right. And that's such a different way than human beings think.
Right. A bad scientific study is when you do it and it comes out exactly like everybody else's. You're like, oh, shoot, that's not very interesting to a scientist to confirm everything we already know to be true. So it's really a misperception on the scientific process. And we don't teach, I know you have a background in education. We don't teach enough about the scientific process. There's something called the Next Generation Science Standards, which are recommended standards about scientific processes we want to teach in K-12 education, and they do emphasize that process more than just facts, and yet only a few states have taken that up to inform their science curriculum.
Yeah, and that's a whole different conversation, trying to get that shit into the schools, because that people don't even want that. So there's two things that I want to get to before we wrap up. The first is sort of the third question that I wanted to talk about was the role of science in this, right? The business of science with journals and the way journals work and the way all of those things, how much does that play into this sort of science denying that we have? And what I mean is journals, for instance, if you're a researcher, it's hard to get published by replicating, right? Like replicating a thing is hard. There aren't journals that do. Nature ain't publishing 10 studies that confirm what we already know, right? And so it feels to me like the process of science is on the business of science is broken.
Well, there's no question that we as academics, live under that publish or perish kind of motto. And there is so much pressure on researchers that you've even seen people plagiarize or, make up data, and that's rare and it is discovered. So that's good. But you see those pressures really leading to bad outcomes. And so we would love to see more public funding of science.
Yeah.
So there wasn't that competitive pressure to maybe go with a corporation to fund your research, because then there could be some bias there. And then we would love to see, more open source publication of failures to replicate, which are very important pieces of research.
Because I feel like that is what hides the process from people, right? Like, not that regular people are reading Nature and shit like that, but again, if you have to publish and then your university is putting out releases because they want it to be popular so that you can get funding from the NSF that then goes out into the media, to me, it is a chain of things that are happening. And maybe more of a circle, because I don't know where it begins and whose fault it is. But those three things seem to feed into this world that we live in now, where people don't believe science.
Well, one thing we would say is that back in our day, there was more funding for science. And so that's helpful, as it can create more access to funding for a diverse array of researchers and reduce that competition. And also the expectations at universities, are out of this world, right? So you get full professor, they want 100 publications and millions in grants. And so there's just a lot of pressure on people to do a smaller study rather than something longer term or something with more import that might be harder to publish. And we should be rewarding application of science to problems such as climate change and public health.
And universities want those to be new research. I guess that gets back to the idea of replication studies. If you publish 100 of those, you're not getting tenure.
No, you're right. I mean,
I've sat on tenure committees. I know.
Yeah, right. There's definitely a press for new information, and that's really critical. But that also feeds science in a healthy way as well. It keeps people looking at the cutting edge and trying to figure out what should be falsified here, or what is the next variable we need to add to this to understand it. I mean, there's a lot of really fabulous research going on in all the areas that we're concerned with. We really need to work to get people to interpret it better, and that's a huge issue. You know, I think about the other issue that is the most powerful for us right now is obviously climate change. I mean, we're really at a dangerous, deadly point with that. And when you look at what's going on around the world right now with the flooding in Germany and the temperatures in Canada and the fires on the West Coast, you know, we really have finally a lot of visual evidence for the people who need visual evidence, sadly, when we've known for decades now where we were headed and what's going on.
Yeah. The
But
water
again,
shortages.
but we've got people sowing doubt where we really shouldn't have any. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah. And that, you know, that I guess the fourth rail is the politics, which again, we won't talk about because the weirdness of science being politicized is such a, you know,
Yeah.
I come from Trump country. I come from, you know, largely Republican place. And like at no point grew up, like I got vaccinated as a kid. You know, my parents took me in,
Yeah.
like there, you know, NASA space was like an important thing. We watched all of
Richard
that
Nixon
happening.
created the EPA.
Yeah. I mean, yeah,
Um,
it's really this last like decade and a half, it feels like that there has been this weird shift. And again, not Republican or Democrat, but that science has become very politicized in a
Yeah.
way
That
that I
was a
don't remember.
deliberate thing, because when we were younger, as you say, you know, it didn't matter what political party you were rooting for the space race, you were
Yeah.
rooting for American innovation
Yeah.
in
No
science.
polio.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as Fauci had said, if the polio vaccine had come out in this kind of climate, we would all still be getting polio.
It's
I
crazy,
mean, that's
right?
really troubling. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that's amazing. So, I mean, amazing in a bad way. So,
Yeah.
I want to sort of end with personal stuff. So, what makes you guys sit down and go, okay, we got to write the book Science Denial? Like, what is it that spurs you on? Because I'm always interested in why people choose to explore a specific question. So, what was it in your
The,
lives that made that happen?
these are actually issues we've both been working on for several decades in parallel lives and sometimes together. So they are, you know, this is a lifetime of research that we've both done that drove us. But we were at an invitational conference that the German Science Foundation and the US Science Foundation organized about 10 years ago. And it was on the public understanding of science. And we were privileged to be there with all these wonderful scholars who were doing research in the area and realizing that we needed to get this out further. So we wrote several peer-reviewed articles together, but out of that, we knew we really wanted to bring it to the public. We really felt like we know enough now to really try to help people wrestle with this. And again, it's not an us and them issue. We're not looking at some people think this, some people don't, but we're all susceptible to certain
Yeah.
parts of these psychological processes. And so I think anybody will find the book a valuable read, both in terms of understanding themselves and understanding their neighbors and their relatives who maybe don't quite get this. And it offers suggestions for how to talk to those people as well.
So let's end with that. What are some of the ways to talk to those folks? Because, you know, we don't do that so much anymore. And we don't hear so much anymore either.
You've just identified the most important thing, and that is talk to people with different points of view. And all of us have got to do more of that. Listen to other people, and listen to you know, people's true concerns. As Barbara was just saying, if you're a young woman and you've heard the vaccine would make you infertile, that's obviously a legitimate concern. And then to get that misconception cleared up is important. But, you know, just, you know, being preachy about vaccination without listening to someone's concerns, that's a problem. So we need to really understand each other and what our concerns are and try to help people find better information so they can get those concerns addressed.
And I think we have to get out of dichotomous thinking I think like this and they think the opposite.
Yeah.
And really realizing there's some point of connection and finding that point of connection with warmth and with good listening skills. And, you know, I have told Gale this story of meeting with a climate denier who had come to one of my public talks and wanted to get together afterwards. And it was initially, we were in very different camps, but then we began to talk about the fact that we both had grandchildren. We cared about the world that we were leaving for them. And suddenly his conversation changed and he talked about Well, actually, he had some economic concerns about how to fix it. And everything shifted. And I think we need more of those conversations where we find what do we have in common and how do we build on that?
Yeah. One of the things I talk about on the show all the time is my Venn diagrams, right? Like I interview and talk to
Yeah.
I talk to people from all over the world, from all different backgrounds and in the two different versions of the show. And there's always a Venn diagram, right? And like if you can first
Yeah.
figure out where the cross, where that is,
Yes.
then the other stuff is easy and it's exciting. It's when you think that the circle, there is no Venn
Yes.
diagram, right? That it's two circles, and it's a skill. And it's, look, I'm a white dude in America, so it's taken me a long time to develop and understand and
Yeah.
empathy and to understand the importance of that, because I always say, like, we're the most dangerous people in this country because white dudes don't have rails. We've never been sort of constrained in a way that everybody else in this country has been. And so I think, because I sort of think that it's this sort of, I know you guys won't say this, but I'll say it, like, this is sort of like white dude machismo that seems to be pushing this anti-science stuff, and they don't see a Venn diagram. They see
Yeah.
two circles. And
Yeah.
so it's particularly incumbent upon people that look and sound like me to say, no, everybody, we all have a Venn diagram somewhere. And we have to be the ones that approach other people to sort of find that.
Well, also it's extreme interpretation of values. Like we believe in freedom in the United States, but you're not free to drive on the wrong side of the road.
Right.
Or drunk.
So you have to balance that with responsibility. And we all talk about freedom, but we're having a hard time talking about what was the responsibility. And also we're very independent in the United States, and we like to think about individualism, but we have to also remember that, we all live together here.
Right.
And so the pandemic has made us realize we got to think a little bit about our collective neighborhoods and nation and what we can do together.
And that's the patriarchal sort of like hyper machismo whiteness thing that just sort of permeates this to an extent that people don't see it, right? It's a fish in water. Like they don't realize they're swimming around in this because they're just around all the time. And cutting through that and understanding that, at least, the way I approach it is that, if you're machismo isn't it being an individual, it's not freedom at all costs, it's not don't tread on me, it's kindness and taking care of people around you. Like that was the first thing I was taught as a kid, right? Like take care of those that can't take care of themselves, help those who can't, because someday you'll be that person, right? Like outside of it's the right thing to do, self-preservation. And it seems like we have forgotten it again, and that's why I talk so much about Venn diagrams, because we just forget, like, there's way more about us that's the same. Just like you were talking about with the climate denier, like grandkids, family wants a better place, concerned about the economy, everybody, money is an issue. Like that's just normal shit that somehow we've turned into, you don't understand. Like, no, we all understand that.
Well, I think your Venn diagram example is just an excellent one, and we just might borrow that from
Do
you.
it.
That's just a great way to think about it, and about how you find that intersection. And that's really what it's about, is figuring out where do you connect with someone, and how do you use that as a platform to leverage the discussion.
Yeah. It has been lovely talking to you guys. Obviously, I could talk about this subject forever. I'm so happy that you're out writing about this and talking about it. The book is Science Denial, so like it's well named, on the nose. Like there's no no confusion about what it's about, but it's just, I think, the most important of many important topics in this country. I mean, I think so much of where we are starts with that, this inability to trust or believe science.
Well, we agree. We appreciate very much the opportunity to talk with you, Brad. It's been great.
Yes. And
thank you so much.
Yeah. I can't wait to pick this up and read it. Although I'm sure the whole time I'm going to be nodding my head going, yes, thank you. We need more of this. Do this. And I'm happy to have you guys back on to talk about this whenever you want to.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'd love to.
Have a great day.
You too.
Well, there you have it. That was Dr. Gale Sinatra and Dr. Barbara Hofer. Their book, Science Denial, Why It Happens and What to Do About It, is out right now. I think this is the most important topic that exists in our country at this particular moment. So you should go out and buy that, because we have to figure out how we're going to talk to each other. We have to figure out how we can find these common grounds that I know exist. We're just having a hard time getting to them. Before we get out of here, just a couple reminders. If you like what you heard or saw today, please do us those two favors we talked about at the top of the show. Leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends about us. While you're at it, don't forget to check out all the other programs on the Solid Listen Podcast Network, including the flagship, Other Man I Sleep With podcast with host and our Solid Listen podcast queen, Molly McLear. Don't forget, we've got these video podcasts coming out on the Solid Listen Network YouTube channel about every Monday and Friday, and we got a bunch coming out because we've been interviewing some fantastic authors. You can also catch the audio version wherever you listen to the Downtown Writers Jam. Speaking of, the jam is out every Wednesday, so make sure you get subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And remember, you can always catch us on Twitter and Instagram at The Writers Jam. Till the next time, I will see you around the internet.